Welcome. You found your way to MindLife Mayhem.
Congratulations.
Conversations exploring critical challenges affecting people's ability to lead a full life.
MindLife tackles the construct of psychiatric disability as we have known it.
With brave and fearless thinking, MindLife finds new ways to challenge the old narrative.
We invite you, either as a help seeker or a help provider, to think, live and ultimately be different.
I'm Gill Townsend.
And I'm Helen Glover.
We're ready to take on the challenge.
Are you?
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
You're ready, Helen. You look like you're ready.
I'm ready. We're bringing this home.
We are. This is the final podcast in the MindLife Mayhem series.
So much mayhem to have in such a short time.
Yeah, it looks like we're creating some mayhem there. Look, what I want to do in this podcast is really to wrap up what we've been talking about. We've had some great conversations. We've been focusing on the MindLife mindset.
Can you name them?
I can name them.
Have
Or
a
the
go.
Categories.
Okay, have a go.
We've been talking about the role of others.
Yes.
We've
been talking on human rights.
We've been talking about psychosocial disability.
That we have. We've been talking about personal capacity.
We talked about on community.
Bingo.
Today we want to talk about the things we've missed talking about. So there's a few little MindLife Mayhem things we want to test and try with you.
Put out there, see how they
Put out there. First of all, I want to kick off that MindLife's funded through an information linkages and capacity building grant.
What does that mean?
What was that? What was the intention of that in the first place? So in all seriousness, the information linkages and capacity building grants are about understanding social inclusion. They're about promoting social inclusion. They're about understanding what the barriers are for inclusion. Because if you know what the barriers are, then you can address them.
And I think that's a really interesting thing, because most times when we talk about individual linkage and capacity grants or work, we're thinking about building the capacity of individuals, but we're not actually providing anything for individuals.
No, the whole point about MindLife has been that we're not trying to change the person.
Because the person doesn't need changing.
We're trying to change the narrative.
And the system and the barriers that stop people exercising their fullness of life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Helen, one of the things we wanted to talk about is something I've heard you talk about before, and let's lean straight in there, the concept of the misery industry. Do you want to tell us what you think about it?
Are we allowed to talk about that out loud?
I think at this point we can talk about the misery industry out loud, and by
Mm.
naming things you can actually see what it really is. And where do we sit with that? So why do you think about the misery industry?
It's something, when we think about what we've created here. When I was accessing help, there wasn't such a big industry. Kind of very small industry that you kind of saw a psychiatrist in a day centre and a community nurse occasionally. But most of it, you're kind of on your own to navigate, and people didn't get in your way so much. Now, I'm not saying that that's the best and be all, but I have noticed this kind of industry just explode. But it needs to have misery in order to exist. It needs to have human misery or human distress at its heartbeat. And so when we think about, in order to keep this industry alive, which employs many, 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 many thousands of people in Australia, the heart of it,
and growing,
is that it survives on people being miserable to come into it. There's therefore not a great, I don't know whether I can say this, but there's not a great emphasis on people leaving the misery industry in terms of help seekers. Mm-hmm. So we kind of can get trapped in that because it's this industry, and the industry needs us and we need the industry, and it kind of is a love-hate relationship that keeps this industry growing and growing and growing and growing. Mm. And I just, because I'm part of this industry as much as, I'm critical of it. And I'm wondering what it would be if it wasn't a misery industry, but it was a flourishing industry. That the reason that we created services or responses wasn't about kind of responding to people's misery, but providing those opportunities for people to flourish and not languish. Mm. And we know from the flourishing and languishing research that it's a completely different paradigm to that of the mental illness paradigm.
Yeah.
There's a dual continuum there. And Corey Keyes talks about this very eloquently, but we can have a mental illness, and people assume when we have high symptoms of mental illness that most of us are languishing. And yet some of us are flourishing. And we assume that if people don't have a mental illness, that they're flourishing, and yet many of us are languishing.
Yeah, when I first heard you speak about that and read about that, it really sort of surprised me, because you can be languishing and have no mental illness at all, but really be in a really rotten space.
A rotten space, and that actually is the very thing about capacity that we're trying to build here. Do you know how many people are actually languishing at any one time in a human population? How many adults? What percentage?
I don't know. I imagine it might have grown in recent years.
I don't know whether it's grown, but I think you'll be surprised that most of us are languishing. 80% of adults at any one time are languishing.
Yeah. And what do we mean by languishing? Because I just said, it's in that rotten space, but what do we mean by languishing?
There's a number of ways to look at it, but it's kind of our mental well-being space. So things around, I can navigate difficulties and sticky moments. I have a purpose in life. I've got something to get up for. I've got relationships that need me and I need them. I've got this sense of social engagement environment. I get some joy and happiness and satisfaction, but they're not the most important things. They're what they would call the hedonistic factors of well-being, but the more eudaimotic ones, the ones that are kind of more sustainable, is this a bit about, for me it's about that bit about I can navigate my emotional, social well-being space in a way that if difficulties come, they actually, it doesn't stop me. I think we get stuck and we go into our languishing space when we've lost that agency that we can do anything.
Yeah.
And I think most services are set up to start with people in the high mental illness space, but we're just trying to move to less mental illness.
Yeah, because you often think of it on a line, mental illness, not so much mental illness.
Yeah, where this is actually saying we've got to get above the line. We've actually got to, despite someone's symptoms, I can be taking up a flourishing space, which means we have to have very different opportunities. So not opportunities that are wrapped up in cotton wool or bubble wrap. Opportunities that allow me to stretch, opportunities that help me to recognise I can navigate and am navigating this kind of VUCA world that's volatile, uncertain, chaotic, and full of ambiguity. It requires me to develop my adaptability skill rather than my, kind of stay safe and my status quo skill muscle. So for me, I think we've pitched this whole industry, and whether it's mental health or any other social issue, as misery to get in, rather than kind of the cost of us all languishing is very costly to society. To economic fallout of a languishing society is huge, but we've got little to help us stretch into and name that stretch into our flourishing space.
Yeah. One of the things early on when we spoke about the misery industry, for me it's this notion that it's a whole industry, that there's so many cogs and wheels and mechanisms and things that are interconnected about keeping it going.
And to get through it.
Yeah.
We start off with, we used to have just a clinician. Now we've got case managers and care coordinators and service coordinators and mega service coordinators for the coordinators to coordinate the coordinators. And it's just this industry of complexity that you kind of look at it and go, how do we design that?
Yeah. Hey, and you remember when we did one of the first design labs that we did in a regional area? One of the community members, who's a really smart businessman, said in the middle of the day, you know what you've done? You've just made an industry out of human connection and ordinary things.
Yeah, ordinary problems.
Yeah.
And I think this is to name us that, what industry do you work for? We're not in the mental health at the moment. We're in the misery industry.
Yeah. I don't know if I want to work in the misery industry.
It's not life-giving.
Yeah. So what would it look like? I think that's the stretch. That's the question. What would it look like if we were to work in a flourishing
Well, we can't
industry?
flourish without actually trying new things, having a go, stepping outside our comfort zone, kind of recognising. I love Heifetz's concept of the productive zone of disequilibrium. And for me, that's about how do we create something that's kind of a bit disruptive, that actually we don't change when we're safe and comfortable.
Yeah, that's very, very true.
And I think all our misery industry models are set up to keep people safe and comfortable. I did a bit of a desktop analysis a number of years ago now, but looking at most of our funded services in Australia, and at the heartbeat of their design, at the centre of their design, where they'll say the person's at the centre, actually the centre of the design's a case manager, care coordinator, service coordinator, which tells you a lot about what the model's set up to do. It's set up to manage people's lives. It's not set up to help people into that flourishing space. So we become a prop. And, that fundamental belief that if we can keep people safe, cared for and looked after, we're doing a good job.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't think we are.
And when we think about all of us who work in the industry, wherever we're naming it, we come into it because we want to help others.
Yeah.
We come into it because we want to make a difference,
and we want to see change. Mostly. And I think this is another beautiful question. It's a great question for organisational change, and it's not mine. It comes from Robert Keegan and Lucy Lay, but I borrow it on a daily basis and ask organisations, what will you continue to do? What does he say? I'm not so much interested in what you want to do differently, but I'm very interested to talk to you about what you'll continue to do to make sure you never get there. And I think we've got so many wheels and cogs that in order to change is very, very difficult, because we've not surfaced some of these core beliefs that are keeping it in the status quo. It keeps it in that managed field. So what will this industry do to make sure it never changes?
Yeah.
It won't listen to these podcasts, that's for sure.
Well, no. And
or it'll listen to it and say, yeah, but we already do that. We're already doing what you're saying.
And I think that's part. If you look at the mindsets that have underpinned, or they've come from the work of MindLife, and they've underpinned the development of
they're
work.
Provocative.
They actually invite you to look and do things differently.
Well, they're easy to read.
Yeah.
They get us a little bit. There's something different there, but they're very challenging to let go of the things in order to enact them.
Yeah. We all know that you've got to let go of things for change to happen.
It's the resistance, And so are we prepared to let go of those things? Are we prepared to let go of the things that keep us in the control space, in the management space, in the, collecting data about people's lives in order to organise them? In that, are we prepared to get messy? Are we prepared to kind of not be the centre?
Yeah.
Not to take centre stage in people's lives? And I don't know that we're quite there. If anything, I think the industry has ramped itself up to be more centred in people's lives than it ever has been.
And I think we've said this before, but we're not talking about walking away from our responsibilities.
And this is a difference, responsibility to people.
Yeah.
So our responsibility to people is to create those opportunities for people to flourish.
Yeah.
Not stay small and stay in the safe zone of just managing.
Yeah, so I'm how will we enact, and I think this is a question for all of us, how will we enact a responsibility to people and to each other
and to the
to
system,
enable us to flourish? How will we enact that?
Well, I think we've got to stop just funding the high levels of distress as your entry point. Because it's reinforcing that you're on your own until you get to this high level. I think we've got to start to embed the concepts of well-being all throughout our community fabric, and the steps about this is as much about your physical well-being as it is about your mental well-being. All of us take it into our stride about fostering opportunities for our physical well-being.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure we take the same efforts around our own personal medicine, our own things that we do to keep ourselves in that flourishing space. And when we crumble, we go, I'm getting unwell, and we go to the illness kind of places that aren't well set up. So if my challenge is that I'm languishing, and it's on a different paradigm to the illness paradigm. Why am I going to an illness service to fix it? Surely I'd go to someone who's an expert at stretch, or someone who's an expert at creating that disequilibrium zone for me to step into.
Yeah.
The last place I probably need to go, but the only place that most of us have to go, is to take it into a problem of disease or dysfunction or disability, where it's not. That's probably not the right problem.
And it is possible for us to reimagine our services and recreate our services.
Where would you go? Who would you hire? What would you hire if you were really struggling in that languishing space?
Look, I would go to a friend.
And what would you want of that friend? Do you want them just to sit and listen to you, or do you want something from them?
I want them to believe me, to understand me, to come up with some different ideas. What else would I do? For me, I'd do the things that I know help me. So, I'd walk the dog, I'd go for a swim.
And is it more than even that? Is it about that daring that someone's there to not to actually create that uncomfortable stretch for you, to kind of go, to challenge you, to say, and what will you do, Jill?
Yes, I have friends.
What will you do to make sure you never get what you want?
Yeah, and look, let me tell you, I do have friends who will run little workshops on me every now and then that will stretch where my current thinking is at. And what I really am thinking about as you're talking is that MindLife is not alone in these thoughts and concepts,
and they're not new.
No, they're not new.
We've been having these conversations for eons, and we still need to have them.
Yeah.
And I think what the issue is we've forgotten to have them. We've assumed we're already there.
Yeah.
We've assumed we understand the concepts of recovery and community and connection and collaboration and life, and yet we've stopped having these vital conversations about what gets in the way.
Yeah, and I feel like this sounds like a plug, but it reminds me of the work that the Queensland Alliance for Mental Health is doing at the moment with the Wellbeing First report. And there is some imagining within that report that talks about imagining what it would be like.
Yeah. If we reshape the purpose of why community mental health organisations were there, nothing to do with mental health, everything to do with flourishing.
Yeah. So even though this is the last in this series of podcasts on MindLife Mayhem, the ideas, the thoughts, the provocations still exist. And I guess our question is where will you take them?
Well, can I have another question about how will we know? What will we see if people do take them and do use them beyond now? What has those that have bought this service, the funders, what will they see differently? What will we start to notice?
Maybe there will be less demand for misery services, and maybe there'll be more demand for stretching services.
So less demand for people just to do for me, to keep me safe, to look after me. But actually, I want to hire you because I've got the right and I've got the capacity to ask you to help me to be the best that I can be.
And if we think about choice and control, about choice of variety of what's on offer, not what someone's prescribed for me of what's on offer. So we'd see a whole lot more creativity and we'd see a lot more turnover, more go through.
Touch points.
And for me, you see a lot more people thriving in community, living, loving, great places to live, friends, work.
I think we'd also see from help seekers people who were much clearer about what they wanted to purchase.
Yeah.
What they were actually asking from a help provider. They'll be much clearer. They'll be much more in their chief executive role of their own life. And from help providers, I think they'll actually be clearer about why they're showing up in someone's life and know how to leave. Yeah. And know that they're there for a short time, not a long time.
Yeah. Thank you, Helen. These podcasts have been amazing.
Thank you, Jill.
You've been listening to MindLife Mayhem with Helen Glover and Gill Townsend. This project is funded by the Australian Government Department of Social Services via an Information, Linkages and Capacity Building grant. MindLife is an initiative of Bridges Health and Community Care. These podcasts have been recorded at the Arts Nexus studio on Madangi country, and the music is by Jeremiah Johnson. If you've made it this far, you are clearly a MindLife change agent. And we've got a gift for you. Go to mindlife.org.au and download the resources that will help you to continue to avoid the pitfalls in either seeking or providing help.